Well, greetings and the most heartfelt salutations, everybody. Welcome to the John Campea Podcast. I am, of course, your host, John Campea, and all I'm going to do and what I do on the John Campea Podcast is take in all the topics, opinions, and questions that you guys send in to me. Easiest way to send in a question to me is by emailing me at thejohncampeapodcast@gmail.com. But also, make sure you're following me on social media, on Facebook and on Twitter, because once in a while, I put out calls for questions on my social media, and I take questions from there. So, with all of that out of the way, let's dive into it on this Monday morning, and we get into it with the first question coming to us from somebody who refers to themselves as the Canon. And the Canon writes, now that we've had some time to see the Mavel-Sony deal play out a little bit, from the outside looking in, do you think this was a good deal by Marvel? We can assume Marvel is sharing profit on some level for Homecoming. We also can safely say Civil War would have been a blockbuster with or without Spider-Man. And on top of all of that, Amy Pascal hasn't exactly made the PR of this any easier. Yeah. See, this is the interesting thing. It's a very interesting question. Was this a good deal for Marvel? Really, did this work out for them? Now, going back before Sony got in financial trouble and they had to make deals they otherwise wouldn't have made, one of the reasons I always said that I never thought that we would see a deal between Marvel and Sony, or at least I'd said that we'd never see Sony send Spider-Man back to Marvel, that we wouldn't see Spider-Man in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, was that Sony was in a position where they didn't have to give him up. I mean, and one of the reasons I thought that that deal probably would never happen was because of this, that why would it be worth it to Marvel? Every movie Marvel is putting out is making them big money. They have 1,000 characters. So what would Marvel have to give up in order for Sony to give Spider-Man back to Marvel? Remember, this is before the deal ever happened. This is before Sony was in financial trouble, okay? So one of my big roadblocks was, how is it worth it to Marvel? Because you know Sony wasn't going to give up Spider-Man for $10 million. You knew Sony wasn't going to give up Spider-Man in a trade for like some C-level Marvel hero. Sony would want something big. And considering how successful Marvel was, did Marvel even need Spider-Man? Now, you bring up a really good point in your question when you say that Captain America Civil War would have been a big blockbuster hit with or without Spider-Man. And that's absolutely true. And really, when you think about it, Spider-Man is in a very, very small amount of that movie. He's in 2 scenes. He's in 2 scenes of the movie. So really, it was a great vehicle to introduce Spider-Man, but I don't think Spider-Man added a lot to the box office per se. Also, any other movie they put out is going to make a lot of money. It's going to be interesting to see how much money Homecoming makes. Now, it's not just that Sony is getting a cut of Spider-Man Homecoming. Remember this, Spider-Man Homecoming is a Sony picture. Now, Marvel Studios is listed as one of the production companies, so is Columbia Pictures. Actually, if you look on IMDb, the first company listed as the production company is Columbia Pictures. And then it's also Marvel Studios and then 1 or 2 other studios as well. But Sony is also the distributor of it. I got a feeling that Sony's probably actually going to make the more money, a bigger cut of this film, if you will, otherwise. I think Marvel's gamble here is that they're going to make a bunch of profit on Homecoming, but then that the box office interest in their other Marvel Cinematic Universe films that will have Spider-Man in them will more than make up for whatever it was they're giving up. At the end of the day, it's tough to say if Marvel got a good deal out of this or not when we don't really know, pardon me, what it is they gave up to get Spider-Man in the MCU. Did they give up 80% of the box office? Did they give up 5% of the box office? Did they give up, $400 million in cash on top? Did they give up $10 million in cash on top? Unless we actually know what it is Marvel actually had to pony up and put on the table in order to make this deal happen with Sony, we don't really know. Now, Sony isn't in the same position of strength that they were, say, 4 years ago. Because 4 years ago, 5 years ago, they weren't in big financial trouble and they were in a much better position of strength. They were at the driver's wheel, okay? So they were in total control. Things changed. When they got into financial trouble, suddenly now they had to start making deals. So how much of that translated into the deal that they currently have, I'm not really sure. I don't expect Kevin Feige will ever reveal it. I don't suspect Tom Rothman, the chairman of Sony, or Amy Pascal will ever reveal it. Now, as far as Amy Pascal being a PR nightmare, let's keep in mind that it now looks like what she said at first, that whole thing about, that Venom was in a kind of a shared side universe with Homecoming and all that kind of stuff. She didn't communicate it quite right. But apparently now, according to her and Kevin Feige, she was actually fairly accurate. So I don't know if she's been a PR nightmare per se. And I think a lot of people who follow the online blogs, and we only represent 1% of the movie-going audience. I know we got really upset, but I don't think the vast majority of the movie-going audience got upset. So I don't think it was that big of a deal. So ultimately, was it a good deal for Marvel? On its surface, it looks like it's a good deal for both Sony and Marvel. But until we know the details of the deal, it's going to be hard to say which one of these two actually won the deal. We'll have to wait until somebody writes a history book about it, I guess. All right, great question. Let's move on to the next question. And the next question today comes to us from Steve Rogers, who writes, thoughts on the first trailer for Breathe? I've not heard anyone mention this film even once, although it's Andy Serkis' directorial debut. Yeah, this brand new film, trailer just dropped for it a couple of days ago, I think. It's called Breathe. And it stars Andrew Garfield from, obviously he was Spider-Man a couple times, and he was on what I thought was probably the best movie of last year, which was Hacksaw Ridge. And Andrew Garfield was brilliant in that movie. And it's being directed by Andy Serkis, the guy who does the motion capture for Caesar and Gollum and all that kind of stuff. And he's actually directing now. Interesting thing to note, too. Andy Serkis was supposed to be directing a Jungle Book movie for Warner Brothers. Not the Jungle Book movie by Disney, but a Jungle Book movie by Warner Brothers. They keep saying it's going to happen, but it gets pushed back more and more. I got to read into that and find out what's going on. But anyway, yeah. So Breathe appears to be about this guy and about how there was an era when somebody got polio and became paralyzed. I mean, their life was basically over. They could be kept alive in a hospital, but that was going to be the rest of their existence, living in a hospital. And Andrew Garfield and his wife, Andrew Garfield suffers polio, becomes paralyzed, and he decides, no, I want to live. And they create a wheelchair that has all the apparatus that he needs to stay alive so he can still go out into the world. And it sounds simple enough, but the trailer looked really damn inspiring. Like, I was actually very moved by the trailer. And while this movie was not on my radar before, the trailer has put it on my radar now. Again, Andrew Garfield, I think, is probably the most underappreciated actor in Hollywood today. And I think he's going to give a stellar performance. The trailer looks like it. And, it's really cool, too, because when you think of Andy Serkis, you would think if he was going to make his directorial debut, you'd think it would be like a geek-centric movie. And certainly a Jungle Book, with a lot of CGI sounded like that would fit in there. For Andy Serkis to come out and do a real human story like Breathe is, I think, pretty bold and pretty brave and a pretty smart decision on his part. Because, he could have just made some fan service movie. He could have just made some geek-centric movie and not really cared. And he would certainly have an audience amongst the geek culture because a lot of us love him for the work that he's done. But for him to go out and do a movie like this, I think is pretty ballsy of him, and I'm looking forward to it. So if you haven't seen the trailer, just jump on YouTube, search for Breathe 2017 trailer, and you'll be able to find it. And then jump in the comments section and let me know what you thought about the trailer. All right. The next question comes to us from Angry Goats. And Angry Goats writes, hey, John, I hope you're doing well. My question is, one that I know, okay, so let me try that again. Hey, John, I hope you're doing well. My question is one that I know we've all wondered many times before. It's this. Will we ever see a Real Steel 2? What are the odds that we do get to see one? Has it been too long? I think it's an extremely charming, heartwarming film that shocked me about how good it was. It would be a shame to just let it be. Yeah. If you want to talk about, if you put together a list of the 100 movies you've seen that totally surprised you, Real Steel, I think, would have to be on that list. Because Real Steel, this is the Hugh Jackman film about the fighting robots. And we all mocked it, and we all joked it from the trailers before it was coming out. We go, oh, it's Rock'em Sock'em Robots. I mean, and that's kind of all it looked like. But it had Hugh Jackman, so, he likes to pick some interesting movies to be involved with, so maybe. And the movie's so good. It's really a story about a father and his son, and a screw-up dad looking for a bit of redemption, a son who chooses to see the best in his father, and the background just happens to be set a little bit in the future with fighting robots. I mean, I know it sounds really, really odd. One of the cool things about Real Steel was that the fight choreography was done by the one and only Sugar Ray Leonard. And I'm really glad about the Real Steel exists because I got to do the press junket for that movie, and I actually got to sit down and interview the great Sugar Ray. It was awesome. I was shaking talking to him. I had goosebumps all over me. We were talking about boxing and we were talking about mixed martial arts, and he's a big MMA fan, and that was wonderful. Anyway, you're right. Real Steel was a hell of a movie. And the way it ended with an open door for a sequel, and it made some money. It was profitable, but for one reason or another, they never got moving on a sequel. And now I think it's too late. I think if you're going to do a sequel now, you've lost all the momentum, because now you talk about Real Steel and you got to remind people what that movie was. It was a while ago. Now, whereas you should have gone into production on a new one the year after the first one came out, because now the kid's a hell of a lot older. It's even further in the future now. So you're going to have to change out the robot, because by now the robot they were using would be obsolete. And I just think it's just too many strikes against it. I would love it if they announced tomorrow that a Real Steel 2 was coming out. But I have a feeling the day has come and gone. But anyway, guys, if you haven't seen Real Steel, jump on Netflix or jump on Amazon Prime or the Google Play Store or iTunes or whatever. Find Real Steel. If you got a couple hours one night or on the weekend, just kick back, relax, and watch it. I think you're going to have a good time if you do. All right, let's move on to the next question. And the next question comes to us from David Pyle, who writes, I just went out to see Wonder Woman yesterday and was a little surprised. I read a lot of reviews about how Wonder Woman was such a strong female superhero. To be honest, that's not how I felt walking out of the theater. Well, yes, the character of Wonder Woman is a complete badass when it comes to fighting, but am I the only one that felt like Wonder Woman was clueless for like 90% of the movie? She seemed more like a lost puppy to me until the final act. You know what? Your critique there isn't wrong. You're right. She did seem clueless a lot of the movie, and she does seem like a little bit like a lost puppy in the movie. But remember this. Those traits that you just described are consistent with the context of the character in the movie. Remember, the context that Diana is coming out of in the movie is she has been isolated her entire life on this island of Themyscira with nothing but Amazon warriors that lived life a certain way. That is all she's known. She's never seen a television. She's never heard a radio broadcast. That is the situation she is coming out of. Now, look at a movie like, I compare it to Crocodile Dundee. I know that's a weird comparison, but it's like that. Crocodile Dundee in the movie is a strong, manly man. But then you take him out of the outback where he's lived his whole life into New York City and he looks lost. And he's kind of like a lost puppy. I mean, he's still a manly man, but he looks completely clueless because the term is a fish out of water story. That's what Crocodile Dundee was. That's what Wonder Woman is. Wonder Woman is a fish out of water story. So nothing about her, a lot of times she looked clueless, but none of that suggested a lack of strength. It's that she was a fish out of water. She is now in an entirely new city, an entirely new context. She's in London. And then she's off at the war and she's seeing things she's never seen before. And yet, and this is why I still think she comes across as very strong, in the midst of being lost and in the midst of being clueless and in the midst of being that lost little puppy and not knowing what the heck's going on or what the world is really like, she still showed strength of character. See, to me, that's what strength is. That in the midst of her adversity, that she has no idea, this is a totally alien world to her, she still showed her strength of character. And that's one of the things I think the script and Patty Jenkins did extremely well with the film. So I totally get what you're saying. When you say that Wonder Woman felt like clueless, you're right, but she should have felt a little bit clueless because even Captain America, when coming into the new world, sometimes feels into the new age, I should say, feels a little bit clueless, a little bit lost, a fish out of water. I believe that was the situation with Diana, and I think if they played it any other way, it probably would have been a mistake. But good observation and good question. Anyway, let's move on. The next question today comes to us from Ben Robinson, who writes, Hey John, you mentioned recently that Sons of Anarchy was one of your top 3 TV shows of all time. I recently watched the whole series on Netflix, and I have to agree that it's a great show and surprisingly underrated. My question to you is this. Why do you think it's such a great TV series? What puts it above Breaking Bad or The Sopranos in your opinion? Yeah, my 3 all-time favorite TV shows. And it's always dangerous giving a list because everybody's going to say, yeah, you're an idiot because your number 1 show isn't my number 1 show. But whatever, here's my list. My all-time favorite show is Battlestar Galactica. I think, and then number 2 and number 3 always go back and forth. It's either Spartacus or Sons of Anarchy. Like one day Sons of Anarchy will be number 2, some days it'll be number 3, whatever. But yeah, those are my top 3 favorite shows of all time. Love shows like Breaking Bad, The Sopranos, Mad Men, all those other shows that I'm sure a lot of you guys would be mentioning right now. Love those shows too, but those just happen to be my personal favorite 3. What made Sons of Anarchy so great for me was a couple of things. Number 1, you've heard me say this a lot, but it's really true. I'm really noticing the films that I love the most are the ones where they remember to keep the movie about the characters. No matter what the situation is, no matter what the backdrop is, no matter what the circumstances are, if you make your story about the characters first, you've really started with, one step ahead. And Sons of Anarchy to me is a story of characters. And a huge group of characters. And each one of those characters, whether you're talking about Bobby or Clay or Opie or Tiggy or whatever, or Jax, whatever you're talking, or Jax's mother. Anyway, you're talking about rich, deep, multi-dimensional, terribly flawed with some redeeming quality characters all throughout that just made it magnetic television to watch. And to me, one of the things that I said I've always found the most appealing about Sons of Anarchy, and I've said this before, maybe you've heard me say this, but it's got the same kind of element that the show Entourage was, and that's lifestyle porn. Now, with Entourage, I think they coined the phrase lifestyle porn with Entourage because people loved watching Entourage because they loved to feel like they're living that life vicariously through the characters on screen, whether it's Turtle or whoever. They're watching the show and they feel like they're living that life with those characters because there's something so enviable about that lifestyle. Everybody wants to live that life. Well, I believe there is something similar to that in Sons of Anarchy. Not that it was a glamorous life, but particularly for men, I think there's nothing that men, I'm going to get all psychological here. I don't think there's anything men truly crave more other than sex and the love of a good woman or whatever, finding a great partner, whatever. But I think at their core, there are a few things men truly desire more than belong to a true brotherhood. To be in a brotherhood of other dudes that you would die for that guy and those guys would die for you. And it is an unbreakable bond. And there's something about that deep down scratches an itch I think a lot of guys have. And that's what we see in Sons of Anarchy. At its core, it's this group of characters, but who would kill and who would die for one another. And then, of course, a lot of drama ensues on top of that, absolutely. But it was that element of Sons of Anarchy for me, on top of the fact that it was marvelous, fabulous, well-rounded, well-fleshed-out characters, makes it for me a really special show. And it's available on Netflix now. And if you have not treated yourself to Sons of Anarchy, I'm going to warn you, you're going to get yourself caught in a rabbit hole of binge watching. You're going to watch the next episode and the next and the next and the next. It's obsessive, but it's fantastic. If you haven't seen Sons of Anarchy, I highly recommend it. Anyway, and those of you guys who remember me back from the AMC days, we love the show so much, we even made our whole moniker. We became the Sons of AMC. We made that great logo, or one of the fans made a great logo for us. We put that logo on just about everything. We gave out patches when we went to events. So much fun. I miss those days so much. Anyway, the final question today comes to us from Joshua Morris, who writes, with Ant-Man and the Wasp being released in between Infinity War and Avengers 4, what timeline do you think it will be in? Will the effects of Infinity War affect it? Or do you think there's a chance a lot of it could be set in the past with Hank Pyms Antman and his wife? You know what? I haven't seen anything from Marvel. So far, everything that's come out from Marvel has been in time. This movie happens after this movie, and that movie happens after that movie, and that movie happens after that movie. With some minor, taking liberties of a few months shift here and there, but for the most part, everything's been in order and everything's been in line. I don't think Ant-Man and the Wasp is going to be any different. I think Ant-Man and the Wasp is going to take place. Now, I don't know this. I'm just speculating here. I'm suspecting that Ant-Man and the Wasp will take place after the events of Infinity War or Avengers 3 and be nestled in between there. I don't think they're going to time travel per se, although that's always a possibility with any kind of a comic book movie. But I think they're going to set it right there and be very comfortable there. And I'm looking forward to it. I want to see how big of a role Michael Douglas has. I'm really curious to see who they're going to cast as Michael Douglas's wife, if they do indeed find her, and I think they will. I think that's why they teased, again, the picture of the wife. Remember at the end of Ant-Man? He looked at the family portrait, and there was Hank, his daughter, and the wife, but the wife's face was blocked out by a hat or something like that. I think that told us that they plan on using Hank's wife later, but they just don't have her cast yet. So I do believe she's going to be in it, but I do believe it's going to be set in that timeline between Avengers 3 and Avengers 4. And yes, I do believe the events of Avengers 3 will affect it. Anyway, guys, that'll do it for my time for today for the John Campea Podcast. Hey, listen, if you're listening to this podcast on the audio feed, please consider coming over to my YouTube channel. That's at youtube.com/John Campea, and make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you're watching this on my YouTube channel and you want an audio-only version, just open up your favorite podcasting app and just search for the John Campea Podcast, and you'll find an audio-only edition of it as well. Again, make sure you're following me on social media, on Facebook and on Twitter. And once again, I want to encourage you guys. I love using the app Share the Meal. It makes changing the world. Let's say all of us want to change the world. All of us, deep down, we want to make life better for somebody else. This little app came out a couple years ago. It's called Share the Meal. It's the easiest thing in the world. What I do, how I use it is when I go out to eat, I use eating out as a reminder. Oh yeah, share the meal. I pull out my phone, open Share the Meal, just hit the button, Share the Meal. That instantly donates like $3.50, and $3.50 feeds a kid for a week. You can make a difference today. Get the app. It's super easy. Doesn't cost much at all. And you can make somebody's world a whole lot better. Anyway, that'll do it for me, guys. Thanks so much for joining me. And until next time, bye-bye.